Hey guys, it's Paul, combat veteran, MMA fighter, YouTuber, and today we are checking out Soda's latest video called Deploy. This dropped about 2 weeks ago, right? I love Deathcore Krieg, and so I can't wait to check this out. But before we get started, if you two would get accused of heresy by the Inquisition, hit that subscribe button. And of course, like this video for more Warhammer40k content. Tell the YouTube algorithm that I am making quality stuff here. And if you're an outdoors person and you want to see more of this beautiful face, check out my second channel, Military History Gear Review, and follow me on my recently created brand new Instagram where I post pictures of stuff. Without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so what I'm looking at is definitely not a Space Marine. I want to say it's an Imperial Knight. But what's interesting is it looks like they're sporting 2 arms and a shoulder-mounted autocannon. Now, the positioning of guns on what in the U.S. military we call armor or armored vehicles, right? Those are tracked or wheeled vehicles that are heavily armored and meant for combat. It makes a huge difference, right? And the reason they're on top almost always of Humvees, MRAPs, Bradleys, tanks is because you always want to have that 360-degree firing ability, right? The reason that they're rarely ever below the hull, right, is because it's not very effective. Why would you sacrifice 360 degrees of firepower or fire direction when you instead condemn yourself to it looks like it may be mounted on a ball turret, just like this kind of cone of vision right here. So right there, again, it looks cool, it looks badass. I mean, I grew up playing Mech Warrior, so any walking battle mech type figure, I think it's just outstanding. But from an engineering perspective, it would want to have a very hideous looking autocannon on the top. It's got the arm mounted even larger. I'm calling it autocannon because, again, I'm a Mech Warrior nerd, and that's what we refer to the autocannon, the weapons as. If it has a different name, like an auto gun maybe, let me know. Let me know in the comments below what the names of these weapon systems are in Warhammer lore. Okay, so they are marching in formation, right? And what's interesting is that militaries now march in formation frequently on parades and other ceremonial events, but the tradition of marching in a box formation dates back to around the Napoleonic era when firearms were primarily musket in nature, and so you would create these boxes, right, where each firing line would fire their muskets, right, because they were smooth bore. The rounds weren't that accurate, so you just had to treat them like a group effort shotgun, basically, right? You may not know where your pellet's going to go, but you have a big blob of enemy, and you shoot these relatively inaccurate ball rounds at another blob of enemy in their general direction, right? And that's a way to effectively do combat. And of course, you also would take a long time to reload a musket, because remember, you had to pour in powder, put in a wad, a charge, put in the ball, ram it all home, and then raise it, cock it, and shoot it, right? So it was kind of a process. And so what they would do is they would have a firing line launch, then they would take a knee after they had fired and begin to reload, and the previous line would step up, they would fire their muskets, stop and reload. The third line would step up, fire their muskets, stop and reload. So you had an early version of like covering fire, right? And by the time the third or fourth or fifth line had fired, the next line will be up with their muskets at the ready. Now, of course, modern militaries, right, because that's such an iconic tradition, and it's worth noting that marching, fighting in formation goes back as far as organized militaries have been around. But the classic box formation, that's kind of where that comes from. And modern militaries do it as a sort of symbolic throwback to their earliest days, right? The early days of really states, the Napoleonic era. And what we see is that a lot of militaries do so as, again, as a demonstration of their soldiers' commitment to precision and teamwork and following directions. It's seen as a reflection of soldiers' discipline. Okay, one cool detail that Soda's got right is that you notice these Imperial Guardsmen are marching with their fingers off the trigger. That's a pretty standard trigger discipline move that almost all militaries follow now, and that's to avoid accidentally like jerking the rifle and pulling the trigger. But it's one of those details that if you're not a firearms person or ex-military, you wouldn't be familiar with. So it leads me to believe that Sodas, who is Korean as far as I can tell, may have done his military service, if it is indeed a he, done his military service in the Korean military, right? As you know, Korea has a mandatory 2-year military service for all healthy men. Damn, the scale of that. Maybe that's not a knight. Maybe that's a dreadnought. I mean, that thing is huge and badass looking. Oh, yeah, because there's the knight behind the other Astartes. Okay. What's interesting is that, again, in the U.S. military tradition, and I believe most other, like, Western-style militaries, marching in formation, you'll have your platoon sergeant, your senior NCO, in front, and you will have your commanding officer in the back, right? And then sometimes you'll switch for certain ceremonial purposes, but that's generally what you can expect. Oh, okay. Maybe I got it wrong. You see those Astartes, fingers on the trigger, but I guess the Astartes are the badasses of Warhammer 40k. This is my safety. I could definitely see the Astartes just like flexing on the guardsmen, being like, we only pull our triggers when we mean to. Yep. I think that's exactly what it is. The Astartes just doing the Black Hawk Down SF, this is my safety. And the guardsmen are just like, the commissar will shoot me in the face if I put my finger near the trigger. We've talked about it in other videos. The guy who invented the concept of the orbital drop power armored infantry shock troops, Robert Heinlein, Starship Troopers. It's a classic book and is actually on a lot of military professional reading lists because it's one of the only science fiction military depictions that recognize how militaries are steeped in tradition, how they're steeped in culture, and how the culture and tradition and tactics, when they're done right, they all feed into each other, right? You use that culture and tradition to build that esprit de corps, right? To tell the individual soldier that they're, part of a whole unit, and then that whole unit fights together and relies on that intimate teamwork, right? And so you see that tradition continued in Warhammer 40k with so many of the individual chapters of Space Marines are so idiosyncratic, right? Their uniforms are distinct, their history is distinct, they have distinct Primarchs and chapter masters and long storied histories. And in real militaries, like probably in Warhammer, that serves to inspire the individual troops to understand and internalize the idea that they are fighting for more than just themselves. They are secondary to this great thing, which is, in their case, the chapter or the unit, right? Pretty essential to almost every military in modernity, and obviously for 40,000 years into the future. Okay, I feel like those drop ships, definitely the guardsmen's, I guess they're not drop ships. They're drop ships. They look a lot like the drop ships from Alien, Ridley Scott's Alien movie. Alright guys, I'm here to tell you, that was just sick. I love the big military units doing that sort of thing. One thing I will say that I found interesting is that typical military units, right, and my unit among them, when I was deployed, right, it was really rare prior to an actual combat patrol, to do any kind of symbolic, like marching in formation, anything like that. Right, and traditionally that stuff was probably seen as like an inspection, but what was more likely is what we would do, for example, is we'd have our patrol brief, everybody's gathered around, and then you at the end of the patrol brief, I as the platoon leader, the patrol leader, would inspect things that were essential to the whole mission, right? So I would say, hey, I have to see our VS-17 panel to signal a helicopter if we have to, and I want to see every vehicle's secondaries or the SATCOM radios, right? I want to verify the SATCOM radios are working, right? Because as a leader, you can't check everything, but you should keep people on their toes and be like, okay, the LT, the platoon leader, he can check anything, so I have to make sure I do it all right. Otherwise, he'll be pissed. And then it fell on my individual team leaders or non-commissioned officers to inspect their soldiers like individual gear. So I expected my team leaders to, for example, check to make sure soldiers were wearing proper ballistic eye protection, or that were carrying the proper loadout for that mission, right? They're the right type of rounds for their M203, for example. But that's how we did it, right? But there was no marching, there was no formations, there was no standing. We would stand around, but you would stand around like in front of the vehicles, just kind of gathered in a semicircle. And I think that's true of most combat units, right? They don't do any of the ceremonial marching prior to going into battle. But again, in the Warhammer 40k universe, like we saw with the Astartes, were being blessed by what looked like maybe an Inquisitor. For them, combat in the name of the Emperor is a religious event, and so perhaps that is why there is this symbolic, very ceremonial marching to the transports. Perhaps that has religious significance, right, to deploy and fight the Emperor's enemies. So again, an interesting way in which you blend esprit de corps and tactical mission essential functions in kind of these weird ways that sometimes work together really well. Okay, guys, thank you for watching. That is all I had. Again, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, subscribe for more Warhammer content, and of course, if I missed something or there's more details that I didn't catch, because there's always more details in the Warhammer 40k universe, and Sodas does a great job of including all those tiny little fan Easter eggs for people who are really versed in the lore. Dude, let me know in the comments what they are. I'm learning more and more every day, and I love learning more from you guys. So again, thanks again, and until next time, I'll see you guys later.